Hello, and welcome back to Atomic Blast, the supplemental podcast where we analyze each chapter of Legendary's MonsterVerse. My name is Mark, and you can find me on all social media at Mark Meadows. Today, we will be analyzing and providing commentary for the fourth chapter of Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. Chapter 4 will be all about the hatching and escape of the Male M.U.T.O from the Janjira power plant. Chapter 4 will begin with Dr. Serizawa leaving Monarch's crow's nest to visit the holding cell where Joseph Brody is being questioned. The crow's nest was the nickname given to the observatory that monitors the Male M.U.T.O's chrysalis. Among Dr. Serizawa was Dr. Wayland, played by Brian Markinson, Dr. Janeway, played by Taya Olson, and Monarch Operative Huddleston, played by Al Sapienza. Huddleston and Dr. Serizawa make their way to see Joseph Brody, leaving Dr. Wayland and Janeway to continue to observe the M.U.T.O's activity. Sitting in the room with Joseph Brody is Monarch Operative Fitzgerald, portrayed by Gardner Millar. It is here that we get Bryan Cranston's great performance in the film. Since the first official theatrical trailer of the film, we've heard snippets of this monologue, and from the beginning, it was a captivating performance. Anticipation for Cranston's performance was heightened by his recent performance as Walter White in the acclaimed series Breaking Bad, which had concluded a year prior to this film's release.
And it is going to send us back to the Stone Age!
As Joseph Brody cries out for Monarch to listen to him, Dr. Serizawa observes the data that was confiscated from Joseph. Dr. Serizawa admits to Dr. Shaw that he believed all the data from 15 years ago was lost in the meltdown. Now, when the meltdown happened 15 years ago, Monarch quickly came in and quarantined the city to study the M.U.T.O. If Dr. Serizawa needed to have this information back then, why didn't he question Joseph Brody immediately after the meltdown? The answer to that may lie in both the novelization and in the previous chapter, when Ford takes Joseph back to his apartment. When Monarch took over Janjira, Monarch searched the power plant, but all the data was in fact destroyed. In the novelization of this scene, Dr. Shaw humorously theorizes that Joseph Brody must have been doing his homework. This would explain that Monarch did not expect members of the Janjira power plant to understand what was causing the meltdown, except to assume that it was caused by a natural disaster. For the safety of the planet, Monarch could not afford to confess the real cause of the disaster, and so they simply lied. In Joseph's apartment, Joseph tells Ford that for those first 6 years afterwards, he had been trying to convince himself that this was in fact a natural disaster. This all explains why, 15 years later, the data that Joseph recorded remained untouched at their home in Janjira.
As for the active specimen, its leaching of radioactivity continues at a rate reciprocal to its growth, preventing a catastrophic radiation exposure to the greater population. As a precaution, construction of a safety grid has been approved.
With a flickering of the lights, the conversation now changes. Joseph Brody explains to Monarch that the M.U.T.O is generating an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP for short. Dr. Serizawa and his team rush back up to the crow's nest, where Dr. Janeway explains that the pulses are now only seconds apart. A technician tells Dr. Wayland that there is no radiation leakage because the M.U.T.O has digested all 3 reactors of the Janjira power plant completely. This explains why there was no radiation exposure from the meltdown 15 years ago, and as Dr. Shaw states, this is how the M.U.T.O is storing energy for its growth and electromagnetic pulse. There are some amazing shots in this sequence that really capture the scale of the M.U.T.O. Using that cinema verita technique, we get an over-the-shoulder shot of Dr. Serizawa looking at the M.U.T.O chrysalis from inside the crow's nest. As the M.U.T.O begins to shake off layers, a shot of debris falling in front of a team of workers shows the scale of the M.U.T.O in relation to an average human. When Monarch orders for the containment to be secured, we get another over-the-shoulder shot of a worker posted in the cabin of a construction crane, watching as the electrical fence begins to expand over the M.U.T.O. Unfortunately for Ford Brody, we get shots from his point of view that explains that he still cannot see what is happening at the power plant and what is trapped here with him. Once the containment field is secured and the electrical fence is armed, Monarch takes a moment to consider if killing the animal is necessary. Dr. Serizawa then makes the painstaking decision to activate the electrical fence to kill the M.U.T.O. In this moment, we get a Spielberg-style shot where Ken Watanabe's nonverbal acting can be seen as a reflection in the window that observes the M.U.T.O chrysalis. Shots like these can be found in Jaws and Jurassic Park. Gareth Edwards and cinematographer Seamus McGarvey chose to shoot the movie with the same anamorphic lens and 2:35 aspect ratio that Spielberg used in all his early films, including Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. This wide lens shot is used to capture those true-to-life vantage points and make the footage look as real as possible. This format also creates the distinctive horizontal lens flare that we will see in the next scene and at the trestle bridge in Chapter 8. The electrical fence that tries to kill the M.U.T.O creates a high-pitched whine and generates chains of lightning that attack the chrysalis. I don't think it's correct, but I've always felt that this electricity weapon had a resemblance to the maser cannons used throughout the Toho Godzilla films. When Monarch believes that the M.U.T.O has been killed, a team of workers are sent to investigate. Here's where we see the lens flare and flashlight beam so often seen in Spielberg's films. Before the workers can react, the M.U.T.O erupts, killing them instantly. As the M.U.T.O begins to emerge from its chrysalis, we can see that the EMP charge is released from the tibia of its raptorial legs. In contrast to the female M.U.T.O, the male M.U.T.O must choose to discharge the EMP when provoked. However, the female constantly surrounds itself with an EMP field known as its sphere of influence. In keeping up with our parallels between Gareth Edwards' Godzilla and Steven Spielberg's films, the use of EMP is also used in Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind and in Spielberg's 2005 War of the Worlds. Shutting down everyone's electronics prior to their arrival, the aliens in both films make use of EMP attacks. In Close Encounters, in particular, this is used to famously shut down Roy Neary's car and radio before the aliens finally pull up behind him. We get another round of cinema verite shots, but this time it showcases the shockwave of the EMP attack. There's a really nice shot set up on Joseph Brody that focuses on him trying to understand what just happened, and then the camera focuses on the door behind him as it unlocks from the power outage. As the door slowly swings open, it shows a rush of panic as the workers flee from the hallway. As Monarch begins to panic and evacuate, Alexandra Desplat's arrangement called M.U.T.O Hatch really illustrates the horror of this scene. The staccato beats and dissonant chords from the orchestra create a tension often felt in the slasher horror genre. Ford, who still has no idea what is happening, finally hears the sound of the M.U.T.O's cry. Now, Ford has been very familiar with bombs, blackouts, and klaxons, but this is the first time he's heard something like this, so he has to come to terms that there is something alive that is trapped here in Janjira. Monarch rushes to get the power back up, and the film makes it difficult to see the status of the M.U.T.O. When Monarch does finally get the power back on, the M.U.T.O breaks free entirely from its chrysalis, but the flickering spotlights and containment fence causes the monster to panic. The M.U.T.Os were also designed by Matt Alsop and are the first American-made kaiju for a Godzilla film. Gareth Edwards wanted the M.U.T.O to be angular in design and felt it was appropriate for the flying male M.U.T.O to resemble a stealth bomber because its priorities revolve around nuclear energy and electromagnetic pulses. Most of the M.U.T.O's anatomy and behavior is based on insects such as cicadas, mantises, and love bugs, but there are also samples of rhinos, elephants, and bats used in the overall structure and skin of the monsters. The M.U.T.Os also bear some resemblance to the aliens from Spielberg's War of the Worlds. Joseph finally makes his way to the containment area and finally observes the destructive animal that changed his life 15 years ago. This shot of Joseph seeing the M.U.T.O from a distance allows us to fully observe the monster as well, and also lets us see that more containment engineers are arriving to help detain the creature. And here's a more obvious nod to Spielberg's film Jurassic Park, but when the male M.U.T.O finally collects itself from thrashing about, it now realizes that the electrical fence is disabled and slowly raises its claws over the suspension cables, similar to how the T-Rex studies its own electrical fence. In a great display of intelligence, the male M.U.T.O dislocates the entire containment perimeter in a single pull. The cranes fall onto the gantry that Joseph is standing on and also onto the van that is holding Ford. In an unfortunate setup of physics, the weight of the construction cranes allow Ford to finally free himself, but must then watch as his father plummets from the collapse of the gantry. Before Ford has time to rush to his father's aid, the M.U.T.O emerges from its containment, revealing itself completely to Ford. Ford, for the first time, is seeing an animal unlike anything he has seen before. From the shock of the M.U.T.O rising onto the platform, Ford falls onto his back and again covers his face with his radiation helmet to protect himself in ways that have only made sense to him until now. He is unsure how to comprehend what he is witnessing and how to react appropriately. The male M.U.T.O begins to cry out as it pumps blood into its newly grown wings and then flies off from the power plant. To conclude the analysis of this scene, I want to talk about the visual effects created by Whittle Workshop, because they really do succeed in creating objects that feel believable. The M.U.T.O is the most obvious object, but effects like a fire truck being tipped over and cables being pulled can really go unnoticed, and that's because they are so believable that the human mind doesn't stop to consider that those objects are purely computer generated. The animations of the M.U.T.O and other objects move in a way that convey a sense of weight and texture that makes the effects seem as real as possible. And that about does it for today's episode of Atomic Blast. If you have any questions or want to discuss any and all things Godzilla, you can find Atomic Blast on Twitter at Atomic Blast Pod or me personally at Mark Meadows on all social media. And if you've enjoyed everything you've heard today and want to show your appreciation, consider leaving a positive review or tell your friends about the show. With all that said, I hope you check out the next episode and I will see you then.